All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're undertaking an elite medical investigation into the systemic biology of GLP-1 therapy. Now, we aren't just looking at a medication here. We're essentially constructing an ever-expanding map of human biological networks. We want to see exactly how your metabolism, your gut microbiome, your nervous system, and even your sleep architecture all interact, adapt, and, quite frankly, occasionally fight back when introduced to this incredibly powerful pharmacology. So consider this a deep dive into the interconnected systems that actually govern human health, longevity, and body composition. Here is the agenda for today's clinical grand rounds. We'll start with GLP-1 pharmacology, move into metabolic adaptation, cover lean mass preservation, explore gut microbiome resilience, discuss sleep and recovery, and wrap up with long-term maintenance. Section 1. Mechanisms of GLP-1 pharmacology. Okay, so naturally occurring GLP-1 is an incretin hormone, and it has a half-life of just about 2 minutes before your body's enzymes totally break it down. But synthetic GLP-1 receptor agonists, they are engineered to resist that enzymatic degradation, meaning they can stick around in your system for days. Because of this, they're able to cross the blood-brain barrier and continuously activate the POMC and CART neurons right in your hypothalamus. And those are basically the brain's master switches for appetite suppression. At the exact same time, they're inhibiting your hunger-stimulating signals. So we're not just making the stomach feel full here, right? We are fundamentally hacking the brain's evolutionary perception of starvation and satiety. As you'll see, this therapy operates through a highly interconnected, dual-action biological network. On the central level, up in the brain, it induces deep satiety and significantly tones down your dopamine reward signaling, which effectively silences that overwhelming hedonic drive to just binge on ultra-processed foods. Then, on the peripheral level, it delays gastric emptying in your stomach and optimizes pancreatic insulin release. It is a complete top-down and bottom-up feedback loop. But, setting up this loop raises a pretty vital question about how our fundamental biology responds to such a sudden, drastic change in energy dynamics. So what actually happens when your biological system adapts to a sustained caloric deficit? You see, human physiology doesn't really care that you want to look good for summer. It interprets a massive drop in calories as a life-threatening famine, and our evolutionary biology is brilliantly, relentlessly hardwired to defend our energy stores against starvation. Section 2. Navigating the metabolic plateau. Let's break down the feedback loops that cause these frustrating weight loss plateaus. As your body mass decreases, your resting metabolic rate literally plummets. Your body simply requires less energy to exist. Simultaneously, falling fat mass leads to a really sharp drop in the hormone leptin, and that drop acts like a biological alarm bell going off, paradoxically ramping up your hunger signals even while the drug is trying its hardest to suppress them. Add in something we call behavioral calorie creep, where your portion sizes just unconsciously get a little bigger over the months, and boom, your energy deficit completely vanishes. Which brings us to an absolutely crucial point, highlighted by this shocking number, 25% to 40%. That is the percentage of weight loss on GLP-1 therapy that frequently comes from critical lean muscle mass and bone tissue, rather than fat, if you don't have the proper lifestyle interventions in place. And let me tell you, that is a severe threat to your long-term metabolic health. Section 3. Preserving lean body mass. You see, mere weight loss is a really blunt, pedestrian metric. The scale cannot distinguish between fat and functional tissue. If you lose weight but sacrifice muscle in the process, you run the risk of sarcopenic obesity. That means you end up smaller, sure, but with a higher body fat percentage and a structurally weaker skeleton. Muscle is basically a metabolic sink. It burns calories at rest, it regulates your blood sugar, and it physically supports your skeleton as you age. So losing it, that just sets the stage for a future metabolic disaster. Mitigating this muscle loss requires a very precise clinical protocol. You want to target a moderate 1 to 2 pound weekly loss, strictly adhering to your titration schedule so you don't shock your system. But the absolute non-negotiable anchor here is protein. Hitting 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight daily, paired with resistance training, is literally the only way to signal your body to preserve its health capital. And of course, carefully track your side effects so you can continuously adjust the plan. And listen, this isn't just some fringe idea we're throwing out there. The leading medical institutions, from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine to the Obesity Society and the Obesity Medicine Association, unanimously agree on this. GLP-1 pharmacology is merely a catalyst. High-quality, nutrient-dense interventions and resistance training are the actual building blocks you need to recalibrate your metabolism. Now, let's pivot away from the musculoskeletal system for a second and jump into gastroenterology. We have to ask, how does keeping food in the stomach longer, this whole delayed gastric emptying thing, how does that reshape the ecology of your gut microbiome?
Section 4, Gut Health and GI Resilience.
Well, to optimize this microbial ecology and mitigate any GI distress, the clinical strategy is pretty clear. Eat smaller, nutrient-dense meals. But here is the fascinating secondary mechanism. Increasing dietary fiber and fermented foods does way more than just soothe your gut. It actually feeds your microbiome, which then ferments that fiber into short-chain fatty acids. And those fatty acids actually stimulate your intestinal L cells, those are the specialized cells right in your gut lining, to produce your body's own natural GLP-1. You're essentially using your lifestyle choices to amplify the pharmacology from the inside out. How cool is that? But what happens when we look outside the gut? How do systemic stressors and our circadian biology potentially undermine all these metabolic gains? This leads us perfectly into the hidden variables that dictate whether this therapy is actually going to work for you long term. Section 5, Sleep, Stress, and Recovery. Bad sleep architecture triggers a totally vicious physiological chain reaction. It impairs your brain's glymphatic system, which is basically your overnight waste clearance network, and it spikes the stress hormone cortisol. This chronic stress activates the HPA axis, which worsens your insulin resistance and elevates those pesky hunger hormones. You basically create a biological state that forcefully overrides the medication, driving intense cravings for the exact ultra-processed foods that caused the metabolic dysfunction in the first place. Recovery physiology, guys, is just as important as the medication itself. So, having mapped out all these interacting systems, we finally arrive at the ultimate test of this therapy. What happens to your cardiovascular and metabolic networks if the pharmacotherapy is suddenly withdrawn? Section 6. Withdrawal and long-term maintenance. The post-hoc data from the SURMOUNT-4 trial reveals exactly what happens 1 year after withdrawing the drug tirzepatide. And it's pretty sobering. We see a direct proportional reversal of cardiometabolic benefits based on how much weight is regained. Patients who regained 25% or more of their lost weight experienced massive, significant reversals in waist circumference, blood pressure, and insulin resistance. The chronic disease state aggressively returns the second the pharmacological suppression is removed. Which brings us to a really critical distinction we need to make. Are late-stage plateaus and weight regains a sign of pharmacological resistance, where the drug simply stops working entirely, or is it behavioral drift? Well, the data strongly suggests it's primarily the latter. It's a combination of your body's metabolic adaptation to being at a lower weight, plus a slow, creeping return to your old eating habits as your brain just gets used to the drug's satiety signals. The medication is still actively binding to the receptors, for sure, but the behavioral guardrails have just completely slipped. And that is exactly why the Obesity Medicine Association emphasizes that long-term maintenance absolutely requires a continuous multidisciplinary approach. You cannot simply prescribe the drug, pat the patient on the back, and walk away. Preventing regain requires relentless, structured follow-up, highly precise dose titration, continuous behavioral support, and an unwavering commitment to strength training and nutrient density. We have to remember this is an ongoing management of a chronic condition. I'm going to leave you with this somewhat provocative thought. Are we simply using these drugs as a temporary band-aid to treat a symptom, or are we going to leverage this pharmacology as a powerful window of opportunity to permanently recalibrate our fundamental biology? Weight management isn't just an endpoint on a scale, it's the lifelong systemic mastery of human physiology. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep mapping out the system.